All right, everyone. So we are here to talk about cannabis beverages. So if that's what your intention is, then you are in the right place. We are also going to learn specifically about marketing and branding as it relates to cannabis beverages. And today you are going to get a first ever experience, if you will, because this is the first time this panel's ever been together. And you are going to hear from an author, a researcher, a biotech innovator, a CEO of a startup, a brand manager, and today I will serve as your moderator and matchmaker host. Now, you may be wondering, what the heck is she talking about matchmaking? I thought I was here for cannabis, but trust me, just follow along with me. So, on our panel today, you are going to hear from a diverse but all awesome group of folks from all different backgrounds. So, we're going to hear today from David Palashak, and he is author of The Branding Bud, and he also has many elusive relationships and high-end publishings to the likes of Forbes and the Brookings Institute, and of course, the ISA and Virtuosa webinar series, right, to add to his very excellent resume. And he also spent 10 plus years as a VP of branding and licensing at Dope Magazine. So we're really excited to hear from you today, David, about some of those tips that hopefully our attendees will be able to take away today. And we also have with us our partner, Austin Stevenson from Virtuosa. And Austin is the Chief Innovation Officer, and Virtuosa and ISA have had the pleasure of partnering together on this webinar series, and this is now our third webinar, and I think we've talked upwards of 12 to 15 different amazing guests across the ecosystem with cannabis, and we're so excited to continue that momentum. And Austin, I hear from the internet that there's some congratulations in order. I understand that you were named 40 under 40 in the 2021 San Fernando Business Times. So congratulations, and now we're expecting even better things from you today. Woo, Austin! We also have, you bet. We also have Alexi Kaltus with us. And Alexi joins us from some companies you may have heard of, like a little company like Warner Brothers, another one, Zynga. And Alexi's going to share with us today story about bringing Wonder, a cannabis beverage, to market. And then we have Mark with us today. And Mark is joining us as the brand manager of a brand. So I know many of you may not have heard of this brand. But there may be a couple people in the audience that have a brand, PBR. Anyone heard of that brand before? I'm guessing that almost everybody here has, and I'm also guessing that everyone here either has their own story or someone else's story about PBR. And I actually learned something totally new today about PBR, and that is it is the second most, correct me if I'm wrong, keep me honest, the beverage brand tattooed on human bodies. I mean, I think just human bodies,
right? So far as we know.
Okay. I was making sure I got that clear there. And then we also have joining us Adriana Hemans. She is the Vice President of Category Growth and Demand within ISA and our resident consumer research insights expert. So now that we know who everyone is, you guys have very impressive bios, so let's make sure you live up to it here in this next hour, okay? I'm gonna keep an eye on you. All right, so let's get back to this matchmaking, okay? So what am I talking about here? So there's been this quote, right, floating around the internet, which some of you may have seen, and the quote is, marketing is asking someone out on a date, and branding is the reason they say yes. So I am here to talk a little bit about dating and matchmaking as it relates to marketing and branding, how those things work together. So just let's open up, let's have some fun. We can just spend like 5 minutes. I'd love to hear what you guys think about that quote and how that relates. Or if you want to talk to us about, dating, you can too. I think most people signed up for cannabis, but we're, we go with the flow here. So who wants to start? How about Lexi? You want to kick us off? I don't think we can hear you.
Yeah, there we go. I just needed to find the unmute button. Sure. So that quote. I think that quote is like spot on, and I think that to me the things that come to mind is I think first and foremost I always try to like apply things to from my perspective. So the first and foremost perspective I have is me as a human being and me as an individual, right? And I think about because of the literal quote is like asking someone out on a date and that analog, right? And your brand is why you say yes, and someone says yes, and I think that that's so true in consumer packaged goods too, because brand is really just an incarnation of a set of ideologies, and that those ideologies or those beliefs are communicated in through different ways, whether that's a postcard, a TV commercial, an email, an interaction or a collaboration with another brand. And so I think that like humans, right? Like there can be different varying degrees of how strong those personality traits come out. Those personality traits evolving over time, and ultimately we all seek connection with people, and we choose those connections based off of whether those personality traits resonate with me as an individual. And I think that's when people think about products, that connection is important. As in kind of like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? It's on that hierarchy. It's not the first, right? Like if I was just choosing like water or no water, I don't think I would be like, well, how well does this speak to me? How well does this well speak to me, or this bottle? But I do think that as we can graduate up that spectrum, the quote really resonates.
Yeah, and it was interesting because we were talking again about that matchmaking, and you said that word that I know we'll talk about because I know a lot of you in here even work together, but the collaboration, right? So across the cannabis space, we see collaboration. And so then when we start talking about differentiation, right, across branding and marketing and what sort of separates everyone, it's interesting because there is great collaboration at the same time. Anyone else want to jump in like on this idea of like, asking someone out on a date, and then, now you're a brand, and that's the reason they say yes. And I know we'll probably talk a little bit about, and then how do you get to your 1-year anniversary, right? And keep them on board. But that initial, pull in, anyone else want to share something before we kind of dig into the meat here?
Well, I'll touch upon it.
Right.
Essentially, I like what Alexi just said. A brand is a promise, and then the consistent ability to deliver on that promise, right? So, so our dating profiles, if you will, are all hype, and we blow things up. But at the end of the day, we finally have to meet that person, see if there's chemistry. I'm using your analogy here, and and continue to to give the other person what it is they're looking for while still remaining true to ourselves. So, if there's one thing I have learned about dating is, you should always, certainly online dating, you should always finish with a question, right? You finish with a question because that keeps the conversation going, but you also finish with a question because you want to learn more about the other person. And now if I use that analogy toward beverages, toward the consumer. So the more you know about the consumer, the more you know about their need states and their rituals, when they consume a cannabis beverage, how they consume it, what form factor they consume it in, and then what the package is or the brand archetype that surrounds it. Those are all the layers to, to really delivering something that somebody wants, and sort of maybe even being a step or two ahead of them in terms of how you create the excitement and the surprise and the delight where it keeps them coming back.
Yeah, and I think I want to roll with that a little bit, David, like as it relates to the book. And before, interesting in hearing everyone talk. So even Austin, if you think just a couple months ago, when we started talking, things have evolved so much. Like I love now that we're talking about, we have a panel of experts here, and we're talking about, real business, right? We're talking about what does our consumer want? Who's our target market? What is it that they desire? How do we attract them? How do we understand what their needs are? How do we understand their use, right? So, we are really, I was chatting with somebody yesterday, really have evolved in our space now, way past guts and guesses, right? It's like we really have to understand what it is that we are trying to represent and what it is that people want. And in an underdeveloped category, right, it's not always going to be consumer demand driven at first, right? Because we're introducing, we're educating. So now that's a whole nother layer to marketing and advertising, right? And I know we're going to hear a lot from Mark later, but if you're going to advertise a beer, at least everybody knows what a beer is, right? And does. And then you've got the branding element. And now in this cannabis category, right, there's a lot more explaining to do. And how much of that goes in your marketing, how much of that is in your branding, and how does that all tie together? So leading into that, David, since you are author extraordinaire, I hear, I think, in the top bestsellers there in Amazon in the category. Is that correct information that I have found?
It is, yeah.
So he's legit, basically.
And to my surprise, the book has been 6 weeks running #1 in 2 categories, which is branding and logo design, as well as green business. And honestly, I don't think that's about the book. I think it's about the moment we're in. It speaks to where we are as an industry and the interest in the industry.
So David, that moment, let's talk about it. The brand differentiation, right? You wrote the book about it. So tell us, break it down. I know that there's all kinds of qualitative elements to it, but I think there's kind of like a strategy or a way that you sort of approach it. Is that right?
There is, yeah. I mean, I basically have an equation. Equation makes it really simple, but it's not as simple as it sounds, right? So, it can be an equation or it could be 4 pillars, however you prefer. But essentially, I think the first thing is knowing who your consumer is. And, to the extent that we can know who our consumer is in the cannabis industry, that's something we should know. That's everything from socioeconomic to psychographic to lifestyle, right? All the other things around that. But then moving from there, as much as we can know about our consumer, really, what's their need state and their rituals? Because when it comes to cannabis or any other consumption, coffee in the morning, tea in the evening, whatever it is, we do have a ritual around it. Having 7 glasses of water on one's desk. There are people that do that. So you didn't get that, but
9.
But there's different ways. There you go. There's different ways that people consume, different times that they consume. So there's rituals in need states. There's also sort of, I always look at it as either additive or subtractive as well. Are you using something? Are you consuming something? Forgive me. Are you consuming something to alleviate a pain, to remove something, or are you consuming it to enhance your experience, maybe create focus or those types of things? These are the things that sort of play in to one's lifestyle. Are you consuming in a social setting or a personal setting, right? So there's all of that. And then finally, it comes down to form factor. How are you consuming cannabis? Of course, we're talking here today about beverages, but even within beverages, is it the carbonated soda? Is it a tea before you go to bed? Is it you show up at a party with a 4-pack or a 6-pack? I think it's a 4-pack of can, and microdose throughout the party. There's so many different ways that people consume cannabis, even within beverage, that it's important to think about those things. And then the last layer is really the brand archetypes. And the brand archetype is, for lack of a better way of saying it, a brand archetype is a shortcut to tell people what this brand is about. But essentially, it's the packaging and the wrapping. And so the book talks about 14 cannabis brand archetypes. I won't go through all of them, but to give you an example, there's gender-based, there's charity-based brands, there's foodie brands, there's health and wellness brands, there's cultivator brands, there's nostalgic brands. I could keep going, but again, within the beverage space, there's different types of brands, which will give you clues as to, you know, this is an energy shot, this is a sleep shot, this is a carbonated soda, this is a tea. But it's those types of things that all sort of pull it together. So the equation really is knowing your consumer, plus understanding their needs, states, and rituals, plus the form factor that is right for them. And again, form factors often come into discrete, non-discrete, you know, so
Right.
if you're discrete, you'll take a mint or you'll have a beverage. If you're not, you'll light something up. But that goes back into lifestyle. And then finally, the brand archetype that rolls it up. That's sort of what I bring to clients to think about how to create a meaningful brand that hopefully then they'll not only come to once, but they'll come to again and again and again. And I think, you know, as you alluded to before, I mean, PBR is that perfect. It just has that history and has that loyalty, and so much so that people, which is crazy, Mark, that people actually tattoo the logo on themselves. Can't get more loyal than that. And one last thing that I have to touch upon. I do want to thank Mark and PBR for what they're doing, because in writing the book, I've got a lot of pushback. And the pushback has been, name one national cannabis brand. And I say, I've got 3 words for you: Pabst Blue Ribbon. And that has done a lot. And a recognizable brand that people trust is huge. And that's what we need in this industry to push it forward.
So, so interesting, because what I heard, so I'm, if I were Alexi or Mark, which of course I'm not either, I just heard a lot of cool stuff, right? So we have a new category entrant in beverage, you know, relatively new, and then we have a iconic, you know, 177-year-old brand. But what I heard was something super exciting, which was you referenced all of these different day parts, usage. So cannabis is something that follows people through their day, right? Like it's a very exciting plant because there are so many different uses, right? That people may start from, you know, from the time that they wake up, you know, to the time that they go to sleep, leveraging the plant for different need states throughout the day. So as I'm a, you know, brand coming to market, right, it provides lots of opportunities. So I want to talk with Alexi and Mark a little bit just to kind of see how that plays. But tell us, you know, what do you guys think? Like we've got, you know, a new brand innovator. Well, we've got 2 brand innovators, 1 new brand, 1 reinventing brand. I just want to hear, you know, when you guys are looking at these plans and your marketing, let's talk about your consumers. What do you know about them? How important is that to you? Maybe Alexi, you can kind of kick us off, and then, you know, we can go through a little Pabst journey.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think like there's one thing I wanted to touch on, which is, you know, something that David was talking about earlier, which is I think David presents this framework that is really important into understanding what you're trying to accomplish, and it's really just a starting. It's like what you need to start the journey, and I think it's also what you need to develop a real muscle around to be successful at the journey. Because the one thing that is, I would say, fairly unique, more unique to cannabis than any other industry, is that the rate of change of this industry and the rate of change within the industry as a whole is just going to be massively higher than almost any other industry. And you know, it's in that way, I think of it almost as cutting edge tech, right? Where the rate of change in some of those industries is so fast that you have to kind of continuously retest, re-examine what your beliefs were and what you wrote down, what your insights were, what your beliefs were, what the conclusions that you drew were, and then see what's changed since we last looked at that. And so I think of that monthly, you know, in kind of a stretch goal. I think of that also, you know, quarterly, and then for sure yearly. But any cannabis company that's not thinking about this framework, you know, much more quickly than that, I think is at risk of really catching themselves behind. And so if you start to layer in the fact, okay, cannabis is evolving rapidly, so I need to be kind of ready to be nimble. And then if you think about the fact that beverages is a new category, and what we're doing here is we're building a category, and each one of the beverage players that are here today came with a certain set of assumptions, whether that's form factor, whether that's dosage, whether that's flavor profile, etc. And all of those assumptions are going to be challenged, reaffirmed, and ultimately changed over time. And so being comfortable with that constant state of change, if nothing more than because this is an evolving industry and we're building a category, is something that I would just point out. So yeah, I mean, I think I'm trying to remember what the other kind of.
Well, let me ask you on that. With you're talking about the speed, right, and the rate of change, and so this concept that you start with a plan, right, a marketing plan, or you start with a framework, but you must like continue to revisit it because it's ever changing, right, and that can be super scary. So you've got 3 kids, right, 3 little children. And you say, well, I'm going to leave kind of corporate world, right? And I'm going to develop this beverage, right? So tell us a little bit about sort of the motivation for that and how that ties into the Wonder brand, right? Because I know that this is personal to you. So how did your kind of personal evolution show up within the Wonder brand?
Yeah, so my background, just a quick 3-liner on my background is I worked at a company whose mission was to connect the world through games. And so we were at the frontier of really a couple of interesting macro trends, which really played, and I see a lot of parallels into what we're doing here, but those macro trends being a new business model and from games, from going from this I pay $30 or $50 for a game versus I'm going to a free-to-play model where I play the game and then I pay through these microtransactions. Social networks was this new emerging trend as well. Facebook had kind of just started to take off. This is in 2007, 2008. MySpace was still a thing. I remember in the early days of my time at Zynga. And then, I think the third evolving trend was really the platform shifts. So from console to web and internet to mobile. And so while I was at Zynga, we were on this meteoric rise, and I saw the duality of alcohol and how alcohol played such a cultural element within the way that we think about celebration, but then also this foothold that alcohol has with really a functional product and a coping mechanism, and the way that it brings people together in these times of stress, right? And I saw that both for me personally, and I saw that both at a company level, right? Like a 3,000 person company level. I joined the company when we were 300. We grew to 3,000 in 3 years. And so while I was at Zynga, I really experienced firsthand, that alcohol journey. And when I left, I really re-examined that relationship with alcohol, and I had this opportunity to look at cannabis as this new and emerging industry. And as soon as I recognized that we would be able to make cannabis beverages in a can one day, the light bulbs all just clicked of this need state of wanting something that doesn't have all of the negative side effects, both immediate and long-term, as something like alcohol, but also something that felt like we were at the convergence of these macro trends, which is really the cannabis industry, cannabis legalization, the way that people are thinking about what they're putting into their body. And so in that journey and kind of how that manifested into Wonder, right? Like our North Star on Wonder, the way we talk about it is we're trying to create a world where we inspire people to choose mindful alternatives to alcohol. And so in that choice, right? Like in that phrase, choice is a big portion of it, because it's not about cannabis is the only product that people consume, but it's about choice and for people to be able to choose what's right for them given the occasion and given where they're at in their journey. And so at Zynga, I think some of the things in terms of how that's manifested its way towards moving from an idea around mindful alternatives to alcohol to execution and developing the Wonder brand. One tidbit that I'll throw out there is at Zynga, we were lucky in that we had infinite amounts of information. We had built the systems and the processes to be able to take consumer information to use that as a point to drive insights. And when I came to CPG, and particularly beverages and particularly cannabis, one of the hardest things that I noticed was that information was so scarce. And so when we had the concept, what I first started to do and try to do is I had this macro theme or idea, And how do we validate that on the individual level? So I would walk into stores, into like the Whole Foods, the Gus's in San Francisco, or these places, and I would talk to people that were shopping the beverage aisle. So whether that was, seltzers at the time, or this is even before kombuchas really like started taking off, maybe they were just there, or other functional beverages. There was so much innovation happening within the beverage space that I just started talking to consumers and asking them how they think about that, and then trying to get to, is there proof points in these conversations and in these dialogues that help me develop conviction around my thesis and what people are looking for from, something that they really don't know, which is a cannabis beverage. So that's at the high level. I know I went on for a little bit, but in terms of how that started manifesting into Wonder, and we started to look and take those anecdotal stories and then see how could we quantify those anecdotal insights. So how could we take N of 50 conversations that I had in stores with people, and then how do I extrapolate that to N of thousands, and how do I start to use that big, call it big data, but more quantitative data to help narrow our decision tree and decision choices down, so that we're making data informed decisions around messaging, visual look, naming, and value propositions.
Oh my gosh, data informed
Hopefully that wasn't too much.
Amazing. That's exactly what we were kind of getting at, and also that evolution, right? Because there is so much background and thought going into this. And congratulations for like not getting arrested for like lurking around the aisles while people are like trying to get their craft beer and their kombucha, and you're like, hey, so what do you like about that? They're like, whatever.
Yeah, you want a cannabis beverage? I got a cannabis beverage.
Yeah, right here in my backpack. Just come out with the puppies in the car, right? Like you can't do that. But I mean, that's the best way, right? You just talk to the people. And I know that's what we're all about. That's what we stand for. And that's really, to me, what Cannabis and the Plant is all about, right? Is the people. So Mark, I'm sure you have a thing or two to say. And so I think you're going to kick us off with your infamous college PBR story. Is that right? I'm totally kidding. I don't know if you have one.
Well, I mean,
you could tell someone else's to us, but I just have to understand your journey and what it's like to take a iconic brand like PBR that has represented different people and moments throughout literally almost 2 centuries, right? And evolve into cannabis, and then to the point of David, saying, well, tell us a national brand, and saying PBR. How did PBR get on board with that? Because we know other people are in the background, but you're there, you're first. We're really excited. Tell us what you have to say about this.
Yeah, absolutely. And David, thank you for the words earlier. For PBR, we are definitely happy to wave that flag every single day as being the first national brand. It's definitely something that we're very, very proud to accomplish. And, let's talk PBR. We're in a very unique position in that, as you had mentioned, Jacqueline, we've been around for a long time, 1844. That's 177 years. Long time for a brand. That's almost 200 years, right? And over that time, we've had the opportunity to really kind of reinvent and reimagine the brand. And when you talk about archetypes, David, this is something that has continued to be fluid. I've had the opportunity to work on the Pabst Blue Ribbon beverage side as well, on partnerships and licensing, and ultimately on the brand team working on innovation. And I think that that spirit of innovation is something that's very important and critically is one of our critical enablers for us as a team. But it's really interesting when you talk about PBR, because I always tell people, whenever I present on the brand, whenever we're talking about the brand or talking to new accounts, new stores, it's always one of 3 stories. Adriana shared a story this morning where, the hometown where she grew up, she knew someone or a friend that had 2 dogs named Pabst and Blue, or it's the number 2 tattoo, after Jack Daniels on human skin, so far we know. And typically the story goes, it can usually fit between 1 of 3 categories, right? Number 1, it is, the stuff that's the beer that my family drank, my uncle, my aunt, or someone. This is a brand that I grew up with because it's just been around for so long, right? Mm-hmm. Number 2, Jacqueline, the infamous college story, right? That's the stuff on a Thursday night, Friday Junior, I was going out to my dive, and, it was the affordable choice, and we've had a lot of really great times with that brand. Or number 3, and probably more resonant as of more recent, PBR all of a sudden became a really cool, like, hipster brand, like counterculture. They sponsor all the cool events. And, you know, that is a really interesting, you know, in speaking about dualities and archetypes, we are, I guess you could say, strategically positioned to be able to really have deep, meaningful conversations with these two audience segments. The legacy segment that has been supporting the brand through and through, you know, I've literally met people, if they fell and scraped their knee, they would bleed PBR, right? And then we have our new sort of consumer, this, you know, and this new wave of Pabst fans. And I want to kind of focus a little bit on this new wave, because this, I think, greatly informs kind of our decision to move into CIB, cannabis infused beverages, right? You know, this audience, they're young, they're creative, they're social, they're big, they drive trends, they have very, you know, large purchasing power. And I think one of the most key characteristics when we were doing a lot of segmentation and studies was that they're open to trying new things, right? And this willingness to open and try new things even influenced us, you know, when I was working on the Pabst Blue Ribbon side, right? What some may or may not know, fans of Pabst, is it's more than just the beer that we all just know, the red, white, and blue. It's actually got 4 different SKUs of beer. It's got a low cal, low carb, the regular, a non-alc, and a high ABV. It's got, you know, a cold brew, alcoholic coffee. It's got a spirits adjacency, which is a project I worked on whiskey. It's got their own hard seltzer at 8%. It's got hard tea. So this really, you know, and to much success of some of these SKUs, performed very well, right? And so I think that, you know, as we continue to have these conversations with the specific psychographic, we knew that they were open to new ideas and new products, right? Number one. And number two, we also knew that they were cannabis supporters and cannabis users themselves. I can't tell you how many times, you know, just working at Pabst Blue Ribbon, people were saying, are you guys ever going to do something in cannabis? Is that ever going to happen? You know, is that ever a thing? You know, will that ever happen? And so I think this sort of emphasis and understanding, you know, what we call our advocate, right? In addition to understanding our lens of, you know, David, if you're wondering, we called, or when I last worked there, it was a creative outlaw. That was our archetype, is the creative outlaw. And if you think about, okay, you know, this is a completely different story for another day, how PBR came cool, hipster, counterculture. But, you know, it really chose to sort of play and activate in 2 very critical cultural pillars, if you will, art and music, right? And it didn't happen just overnight, right? It happened because PBR showed up in the galleries or backstage at shows week after week after week after week, month after month, year after year, right? And you develop a very close relationship with this community to where, you know, you earned your seat at the table. And we know there's a lot of shared sensibilities with this archetype, with this psychographic, with this demographic in cannabis. And I think that's why, you know, it's kind of hard to articulate sometimes when you say PBR, they launched a cannabis infused beverage. Makes perfect sense. That totally fits. And I also do believe that that sort of shared equity, or the equity that the brand has built on both sides, on the Outbev side, now we're in the cannabis side, you know, has really allowed us to be kind of a welcomed entrance into the space.
And so I have to ask, because Adriana and myself have been, you know, out at events, because we provide lots and lots of data, and we have done so for years. And we have been at events where registration is anonymous. I mean, you register, but they don't share the list. There's no telephones, there's no video. And we sit in a room with 100 people and we guess which big CPG brand they're from. At a PMCA conference is very, very interesting, because it was very, very, very strict. So how long, like, was PBR just like, oh, we're just going to do it, and like, we're just going to make it public, and everybody was like, yes? Or was it like, no, this is not, like, we have this brand, like, we are this person, this may mess us up? I'd like, can you give us, since it's already out, like, just tell us the background. Everyone was in, no, cool. It was like, yay, no.
Well, you know, I wasn't there when the moment was, you know, that moment that the decision was made. However, you know, I think the brand team, or at least the team I formerly worked on, they would look at this and understanding the sort of new wave of consumers and think this is only going to make the PBR brand cooler, right? Yeah. If anything, this really affords them an opportunity to learn about a new space with a trusted group. Right. However, you know, it definitely wasn't easy. There were definitely some wars that were fought with lawyers. It definitely wasn't easy. And I think even now, as we continue to sort of work on brand totality, category, total, on education, on, flavors, like if the drinks taste great, we're all in a really great spot, right? And I think that there have been a number of people who maybe perhaps a little bit hesitant or apprehensive on the front end. I mean, there have been a few people that have kind of flipped 180, and then maybe there wasn't necessarily a hesitation to where, this is going to damage the equity or sort of well-being that we built for the past 200 years, because we've all been kind of working together and understanding and internalizing this success with different innovations across different adjacencies. But there was just, there were some doubters, I guess, if you will, about what it would do. But again, as we continue to grow as a whole, as we all work together, and the beverages are tasting great, and the form factor is there, there's no reason why cannabis beverages, if we look at the data, it's growing year over year. Yeah, it was a very interesting process of getting it to where it is today. And I think we're a brand that continues to really want to listen to the cannabis consumer. We're excited to be here, and it was, a multi-year journey. I will say that it didn't just happen overnight. As you guys know, this is a process to make beverages, number one, that taste good. And thanks to the work that Austin and his team at Vertosa is doing, infusing the world, we're, I think, at a point where people are trying things now. I will say, short story, people are going to be open to trying something new. Brand they trust, 177 years old. My mom, my own mother, never had anything against cannabis. She worked in the medical field for 40 plus years. Just wasn't really for her, combustibles, and those that category wasn't for her as well. She, oh, this is what you're working on? And PBR made it. And lo and behold, my mom and I are able to crack up, a PBR high seltzer, and it's, this far in my life, major milestone moment for us.
Waiting for my invitation, Mark, to have a PBR cannabis beverage with you and your mom. Like that is that would be amazing. We got to make it happen, right?
All right, we'll make it happen.
Let's make it happen. So Austin, we've got, Alexi and Mark, who are, their lives, if you will, are dependent, well, their livelihoods, right, on these cannabis beverages. And, I don't have it in front of me, but I think of a plant, right? So I've got a plant, and then I think of a beverage. And so I'm a little bit confused, right? So I have this plant, and now I want it to go into this drink, and I do not want it to taste terrible. I do not want oil on the top and this on the bottom. I don't want the person who gets the first sip to get the highest, and then the person who gets the last sip to not, or the other way around. So I understand that maybe Vertosa plays a role in how this all comes together. And I know that Alexi, like part of Alexi's marketing and branding, which also fits into the 4 pillars, but is really about sessionability, right? So how does the process that Vertosa, the emulsion process, I've heard it a few times, I won't even try to replicate it, but I want to hear that from you. And then we will kind of circle back and close down with Adriana, who will keep you all honest, because we actually have all the consumer data. So let's see if what you think is going on is going on. Work for everybody? Let's do it. All right, Mr. Austin, you are on, Mr. 40 under 40.
Thanks, Jacqueline. No, I appreciate it. And, thank you to this entire group of innovators, designers, beverage and CPG leaders. I mean, Alexi, Dave, Mark, you guys are awesome, and your experiences and your stories, resonate personally with me. My name is Austin Stevenson. I'm the our Chief Innovation Officer, and just a products guy. I'm the guy that takes 23, 25 supplements a day because, like Alexi was talking about, those macro trends around health and wellness is critically important to me. I grew up playing sports. I played college football, and as a result, I suffered through a lot of chronic pain, back pain, neck pain, shoulder pain, you name it, I have it. I was a fullback, which is a position that had to take a lot of hits, and I've personally improved my quality of life through direct, intentful choices that I've made in brands, and in products. And specifically, I fit that macro trend of like the better for you products. And I've always been that person that's really embraced cannabis because I knew it was better for me than the alternatives that my teammates and friends were choosing, like the story that alcohol, Alexi was telling. Yes, originally when alcohol was started, it had some medicinal purposes, but over time we saw some of the dangers that alcohol provides. So I say, you know what, I'm gonna, after this game, I'm gonna, smoke a little bit of cannabis to help relax. But then, over time, we also know that another trouble started to emerge, especially around smoking. And David mentioned this kind of that stigma around smoking and combustion, and the fact that it's actually a deterrent for many people to try cannabis. And right now we're in this great age of curiosity and people wanting and consumers wanting better for you products. So how do we actually take cannabis, something that's traditionally smoked, and turn it into something that's more familiar, more approachable, and that's beverages. I can just probably count over 100 times the action of the panelists doing this motion just during this screen. This is what we do. We consume, we drink, and so it's really hard to take something like a plant, a flower, and turn it into a beverage. And so at Vertosa, that's what we do. We're cannabis and hemp infusion technology, and that story that you're telling is really going from the plant source to a finished product, i.e. taking a plant, extracting an oil, creating an emulsion, and then ultimately leading to that finished product. And that finished product is that beverage.
Can I just pause you for 1 second?
Yeah.
Just only because I just want people to actually take a second to look at the slide. So that's typically not super exciting in a presentation, but when you look at that plant and then you look at that beverage, like there's a lot that goes in between there to there. So I just need to point out that the processes and what Vertosa does is like, it's like amazing, right? It's almost like magic, right? Like how do you go from that to that and make it sit on a shelf or sit in a cooler or do all of these amazing things? So I just wanted to make sure that people appreciated where we start and where we get to in this cannabis infused category. So
Jacqueline, I appreciate you saying that. It's special to me. I'll tell you a story. Everyone's told a personal story. So a story to me is like, how do I explain what I do to my grandmother? 90-year-old woman, and I told her, Grandma, I turn oil into water. And she was like, oh, so you like Jesus? You turn water into wine. I'm like, yeah, if that's what you think, if that's what's gonna help me win for you, grandmother, yes, that's it. We're taking cannabis oils, turn them into an emulsion, and then that emulsion is being used to infuse all these awesome beverages that you see on my wall and that are represented here on this panel. And it's that beverage that is more familiar, it's more approachable. A tenet of our company is another book called The History of the World in 6 Glasses, and it talks about the connection that human society has had with beverages and just really congregating around the watering hole. And it talks about the evolution of going from water to beer to wine to spirits to coffee to tea to Coca-Cola. And like this connection, with beverage is very human. And we believe that cannabis beverage, really spearheaded by the brands like PBR and Wonder, is that 7th glass. And it's really because there are everyday uses of cannabis that help improve the quality of life and just help create new connections and new experiences with people. But it really comes down to, for us, in our role as the infusion technology, is the key ingredient, is the good stuff, if you will. There's a level of trust. And so we've built a brand around trust, around reliability, around consistency. Because when you do have that Coca-Cola in New York, you want to crack it open and have the exact same experience in California. And when we talk about new brands or new product categories, PBR had to trust us. Their brand had to trust us with creating consistent experience because they are a national brand. So they launch here in California and may launch somewhere else. They want to have the same experience each and every time, and they need to be able to trust that the active ingredient is going to provide that consistent experience each and every time. And so how do we do that? Well, number one, we're taking something that is very dense in oil and that naturally doesn't mix well with water and trying to combine it. And it is a little bit of magic, but it's really just advanced chemistry and energy that takes that cannabis oil and turns it into a fast-acting emulsion that's dispersible in water. What is that, and how does that happen? Well, look, in terms of feeling the experience of cannabinoids, you got to cross your brain-blood barrier. And if you think of your brain-blood barrier as a chain link fence, and think about traditional cannabis oils are like a big old beach ball. Everyone's had that college story with PBR, but they've also probably had that college story with the cannabis brownie, where they've had one, they ate it, they didn't feel anything for like an hour, but the brownie tasted so darn good that they had another one, and then 2 hours later, boom, they're out. And they had a bad experience, and then they never came back to cannabis for a while because they were scared or apprehensive. So that's the consumer that we're trying to draw in. That's where Wonder and PBR is taking, like, hey, we know you may have had a bad experience with cannabis oil, with brownies, but we're giving you a safer, more reliable, more consistent, more defined experience. And the way that we do that is by applying an emulsion technology and an infusion technology, where we're taking this beach ball and turning it into a pile of marbles. Because that beach ball, to pass through that chain link fence, it has to be broken down. It has to metabolize. It takes an hour, 2 hours for it to break down, go through your liver, and finally for you to feel it. But instead, when we apply technology, we take that beach ball, we take high energy, and turn it into a handful of marbles. You throw that to the chain link fence, they all pass through, so you can feel the experience in 10 to 15 minutes. That way, the experience is predictable. That way that you can know how to, what they call, titrate. And like, when you take, one of these PBRs, and which is 10 milligrams, and you drink half of it, you know that you drink 5 milligrams. You allow that to sit in for you to feel it, and then you can predict how much more you need, or if you need it, or how much you don't need based on that experience. So it's very predictable, and you can end up feeling it. And then so we kind of show that through a lot of data that we ultimately collect, because data does drive results. So we measure our experience that we create by taking that beach ball, turn it into a pile of marbles, and asking consumers, how fast are you feeling it? We've even applied this to gummies and have showed that we're able to have an onset or experience within less than 30 minutes, and even the gummy form factor. And then we did it in beverage too. We're actually measuring the level of cannabinoids in the blood and showing and quantifying for our clients how quick the onset is, 10 to 15 minutes. That way brands can tell their consumers that, hey, you're going to feel this in 10 to 15 minutes. And you can trust that our active ingredient, when you look, you see infused by Vertosa on the label, and can predict that experience you're having, so that you can share it with your grandma and your mom, or that cannabis curious person that may have had a bad experience in college, and bring them over with a very predictable and reliable experience through the technologies that we're developing. And then, of course, we're going beyond.
By Vertosa, I think of that like infused by Vertosa, sort of like the old like Intel Inside, right?
That's right.
So, yeah, and so we talk about, people say like, oh, like, well, we've got science and we've got product, but at the end of the day, like, marketing and branding comes down to a lot of like product claims, right? Oh. Like, it's fast acting, you're going to have this experience, and so without this type of process behind it, then the brand promise can't come true, right?
You're spot on, Jacqueline. And that was our whole hypothesis, is that we wanted to build a platform that allowed for brands to build off of through creating reliable and consistent experiences. And it is like the Intel Inside. We are powering a lot of these experiences and helping brands design new experiences reliably with our tech. I mean, I remember when PBR launched, it was 5 milligrams per can. But because they got that consumer data, because they were able to really have that connection with their consumers, they learned that, hey, they wanted more. And so where they innovated, they went from 5 milligrams to 10 milligrams, changed up a little bit of the branding, and boom, now you're having sales velocity go through the roof, because it really speaks to their particular consumer and what really drives them to consume and to buy more.
It's so interesting too, just to see, again, going back to the matchmaking, all the collaboration. So I know we're coming up like on time here. We still have about 8 minutes. And so I'm curious, Adriana, like every single person for the last almost hour has referenced a consumer, a persona, a segmentation, what people want. I've heard lifestyle, I've heard everything. Also,
Yeah.
by the way, Adriana actually has, and she has not done it in like years, but we might need to bring it back. She actually has an amazing presentation that she does that I was originally supposed to do. And then I think I got hit by a car, right? So I couldn't do
Yeah.
it. And so then that's actually why I use cannabis. But at any rate, so then Adriana had to step in my place and speak somewhere on a stage. And thank goodness, not thank goodness I was hit by a car, but that she got to speak because her presentation taking us through the history of alcohol and then comparing it with cannabis is just amazing. I think it's time to have
Yeah.
like that like presentation 2.0. But 80, we've got 7 minutes
Definitely.
here. So is this real?
Yeah,
Is
so
this not?
if
Does it
you're
matter?
able to take the
Yeah,
presenter authorization back to me so I can share the slides, that would be great. And in the meantime, that was a great presentation, and it really, I think, shows how the norms are changing, the behaviors are changing, all these habits that all of our speakers have alluded to so far in this panel. It's really awesome to see how they're able to maneuver and meet the needs of consumers as they're evolving so quickly. And I'm going to share a few slides with you about some data that we've collected over the past few months. And it's every 2 weeks we talk to 1,000 cannabis consumers. We want to understand the emerging trends, their habits, and their behaviors. Sorry, I'm just going to go ahead and share this right now so you guys can actually see what I'm showing. Can you all see my screen?
We can.
Okay,
right.
beautiful, beautiful. So for this one, we really wanted to take a deep dive into beverage consumers specifically and find out how are they different from the general market of cannabis consumers overall, right? So we're going to market new products to them. We want to understand who they are. So we have this baseline of the general market to compare it to. And right away, some things, jump off the screen for us. They're more likely to be male. They're more likely to be married. They're a highly educated group. They're high income earners. Also speaking to Mark's point earlier, this tends to be like that creative innovator type, right? And also their reasons for consuming are a little bit different in a few key areas. And I should mention here that the top reasons amongst all cannabis consumers are for pain relief, stress relief, and to have fun. And that's true for both. But looking at a couple of key differences, we see that beverage consumers are more likely to say that they're consuming to give them energy, to feel creative or inspired, or to enhance a sexual experience, interestingly. And then also we want to take a look at now we know what they want these products to do, but what's important to them when they choose a product. So we ask them, what are they looking for? What do they really want? And found out that beverage consumers are interested in that luxury high-end experience more so than other types of consumers. Also that they care a lot about the packaging and the design and the branding of the product. So looking at these numbers, okay, that's interesting, but what is it? How do they define luxury? Like, what does that mean to these people? So we drilled down a little bit more, right? And we asked them, how do you define luxury? What aspects of a cannabis product make you consider it to be a luxury product? And just for comparison's sake, we threw this one on here, which is the expensiveness question, right? That always comes up when you're talking about luxury. So looking across both general cannabis consumers and cannabis beverage consumers, the expensive aspect is the same, right? They're basically in agreement that the expensiveness of the product, the price of the product isn't necessarily an indicator that it's luxury. But the beverage consumers, they're a little bit more likely to say it's important that there's a celebrity involved. It's important to them that there's high quality packaging. It's a little bit more important to them that the packaging is responsibly sourced, or even that there is, some advertising online or on social media, which we found to be interesting. Like right away, you can see these differences in the market. And of course, we talk about this a lot, and it's definitely worth repeating. There is not just one type of cannabis consumer. There's a whole universe of experiences out there to explore. And you know, to Mark's point and Alexi's point also, it's changing so quickly that it's really important to check in, right? And like Alexi said, not necessarily on a monthly basis, but quarterly, and just find out where people are, because it's changing so fast. It's almost impossible to keep up, right? Now, you guys tell me if you think that this is accurate or not.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so you know, specifically for Alexi and Mark, is there anything on here that like stands out to you, or is this like, okay, yeah, we kind of know that? There's a couple things that definitely like stood out to me, like amongst the categories, but just I don't know if you guys have seen this data before, because I don't think we got to it in our practice.
Oh, my first time. It's you're getting real time feedback here. Can you go back one slide?
Sure.
Oh, I love this. We're gonna like dive in a little bit. So what I found super interesting, right, it especially is in this bottom category around the packaging, right, and how much higher the packaging is than in the other categories, you know, under the assumption that the packaging is also going to represent the experience, right, because they're going to hold it, assumingly, but not necessarily, right, because they could pour it and share it in a multi-serve container.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think that one of the things that's interesting that this touches on, and so I guess first on like the packaging aspect, the thing that really resonates with me with why packaging is important for beverages is because every time I hold a beverage in my hand, I'm a walking billboard of that product. And so it's super important. The packaging matters more than any other product because it's more visible than any other product, because it's actually a session, it's an experience. And without like, I think, so the way that translated for us as we were developing our packaging and our brand look and feel is that we tested, you know, 13 to 20 different concepts amongst thousands of users and looked at different, you know, renderings of what our product could look like, and could see how different packaging directions or different visual looks and feels resonated with different audiences, whether that was male, female, younger, older, middle, you know, et cetera. And so going back to understanding where your starting point is and who your audience is, you know, don't take away from this that this is really fucking important, and then take away that, and it's also really nuanced and it's going to be different. So, you know, that old expression of like, you know, I don't know, I'm going to butcher the expression, but it's like, you know, master to everyone is master to none. And so if you try to design something that's for everyone, you're really going to design it that doesn't really speak to anyone specifically. And that's really important when you think about brand, and when you think about, you know, the reason why, you know, I'm excited about what PAP's doing is because we're building a category together, and I don't think we're competing for the same audience. So that's why I think, and it's because our packaging looks so different. And if you go to 1,000 people, you know, the overlap I think is just going to be very different based off of what I've heard.
Yeah, interesting.
And if you bring it back to that matchmaking idea, you don't want to go say yes to a date if you know that person is asking everyone in the whole neighborhood out on a date.
Right.
Exactly. Or if that person tries to, like, you know, it takes 10 different people and says, I want to appeal to all of them, right? Like I take like the most important thing, like at some point it's going to conflict. And, you know, this person likes salty food, this person's like savory food. So I'm going to cook salty and savory food. Like, and it's just like,
There's lots of space out there. So can we, as we're wrapping up chat, so anybody who has time on their schedule to change and hear us chatting, because as you can see, like we can do this all day. It's like so exciting, and the collaboration going back to the matchmaking. But I know that we here we go. I do want to make sure that folks have the opportunity to see our panelists and how to get in touch with them, because I believe that there will be lots of follow-up and engagement, and we're happy to stay on and you know, kind of chat about this end question as people are logging off and writing down the information. Just wanted to make sure they got it in case people had their hard stop at 2 o'clock. Any final thoughts?
I'd like to share something quickly. You know,
let's do it, David.
Marketing, I mean, marketing has really changed, and it's it's to the point that was just made about, you know, I'm a walking billboard, you know, that Alexi just made. I mean, in the 1900s, right, marketing was about the features, right, what a product has. And then sort of like by the 1920s or 1930s, it became more benefit specific, which is what it does. And then in the 50s, it was more about experience, what you'll feel. And then as we got closer to 2000s, it was more about identification, which was who you are. And even now, I'd even say in 2020, it's what you believe, right? You know, so the
David, we're
brands.
almost at the end of 2021, just making sure you know.
Yes, sorry, I lost the year. But you know, it's the brands that we purchase, consume, wear, hold in our hand at a social event and associate with, it comes back to, you know, everything like we're making statements. You know, these are the things we gravitate toward. These are the things that repel us. In every consumer purchase we make, and that's not only the brand but how the product is made, is it sustainable, so on and so forth. And I just think these brands, and especially the cannabis space and lifestyle brands and things like that, that's what it's all about these days. It's not only the excellent product and the technology, you know, it's not only the technology Vertosa brings, right? It's then the layering of the brand on it, and what does it mean, and do people trust it? Is it new and unusual and unique like Alexi's brand? Is it an older brand like PBR that someone can trust? But those are the things that cannabis consumers are sort of figuring out right now, and cannabis manufacturers as well. But it's interesting, and it's been an interesting arc of what appeals to people, and then how we develop those products to appeal to the changing taste of consumers.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what I think, if whoever is still hanging around and listening to us, you can see that the conversation is really never ending. I know some of us spend a lot of time having conversations on Clubhouse. So feel free, like, also to email. I don't know if everybody on the panel is on Clubhouse, but I know several of us are, and we spend time just like chatting in these same similar conversations and sort of just like riffing and building and sharing information. But everybody on this panel is more than happy to chat, answer questions. Please use the contact information. Thank you for joining us today. We hope that you will join us again. There is a recording available for those of you who want it, because it's just so riveting. You need to share it with somebody. And we hope that you all have an amazing rest of your Tuesday 2021. The date is July 27th, if you needed it. You got to write a check or something crazy. It's July 27th. Thank you. If panelists might want to stay for a photo. Do we need that, Adriana?
I think we've been doing screenshots throughout, so we should be good. We should have lots of images. So thank you, everybody. Thanks to our attendees. Thanks to our panelists. It was really awesome having this conversation with all of you.
Yes, and I will follow up with anybody who would be interested in how my meeting with Mark and his mom go.
I love it.
The next one.
Yeah.
Thanks, y'all.
We have a huge office right in Century City, right on Avenue of the Stars.
Close, yeah. It'll happen. We'll save that for the next chat.
All right, take care, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone.